load up the slides. So I think several of you were here for lunch, but thanks, Anthony. Yep. So my name's Keith Morrison. I'm a vice president at Scoyoc Associates, and in that we are the fourth largest lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. We have a large higher education practice. I was introduced to John Jay several years ago when we were doing some work for CUNY, and then I had the opportunity to meet President Travis and have worked with John Jay pretty much ever since. And you know, what we would do several years ago, I think we talked about this a little bit over lunch, was in the past, Congress was directing funding to certain community-oriented projects, and John Jay had several of those, and excellent projects, and Congress was very supportive. We would take them to the congressional delegation, and we would seek and secure funding through Senator Clinton or Senator Schumer or Congressman Nadler. Congress isn't doing earmarks anymore. They put those in hiatus, and so in that the funding authority has been ceded to the executive branch of these mid-level program managers. So what's the way that as John Jay, that we can shift a little bit is to really look at the programs, look at where we are broadly speaking, and in Washington D.C., and then look at some specific funding opportunities that are coming out of DOJ, DHS, DOD, and elsewhere, particularly related to criminal justice. So some of you who've been here before have heard this. Apologize for that, but there are 3 dates that when we talk about all this uncertainty, and we were just talking about it at lunch, there are 3 dates that are the reason for this uncertainty. Is March 1st, sequestration, March 27th, continuing resolution when the CR expires, and May 18th when the debt limit resets or expires. And this goes back to summer of 2011, August of 2011, there was a big debate over whether Congress would raise the debt limit. For decades, Congress has raised the debt limit. And there was something called the Gephardt rule, where he was the former majority leader and the minority leader of the House, where it would automatically, the debt limit would automatically be raised without a vote unless Congress voted to disapprove it. So that's a way to approve something without voting on it. So this Congress, for better or worse, decided that that really wasn't the way to do it, and there were many people in the previous Congress that believed that we should not raise the debt limit, and that we should use that for leverage to get spending cuts, and they did. So they negotiated a deal with President Obama to cut spending by $900 billion over 10 years. If you see that, that's $90 billion a year. So given that they're cutting 21 and 42 billion in 2012, 2013, the budget cuts are like in the out years. They're like, you know, in 10 years we'll cut. So, and then they called for an additional $1.2 trillion in deficit reduction, which would be accomplished through this super committee, Democrats, Republicans, House, Senate, that could not agree, that tried, but they couldn't come up with an agreement. And as a result, under the law, that kicks in sequestration. We talked a little bit about this at lunch. Sequestration is a cut to every single program by the same amount. And under the law that was passed in 2011, that had to total $110 billion in FY 2013, which is about 10% of the budget, which is fairly significant. Those cuts were supposed to start on January 3rd, leading into the election and the end of the year. Everybody heard about Fiscal Cliff this, Fiscal Cliff that. It was the expiration of the Bush tax cuts and sequestration. The combination of those 2 things would make the deficit almost disappear and would send our economy into a depression. So nobody really wanted that. So Vice President Biden and Senator McConnell negotiated a deal to raise $600 billion in tax revenue by raising the tax rates on the wealthy, and postponed sequestration for another 2 months. There really were no spending cuts in that deal, something that particularly irked a lot of the Republicans. But they passed this bill on New Year's Day. And so that brings us to sequestration, which is looming on March 1st. So the sequestration 1.0 was the deal that was negotiated in the debt limit in 2011. It was supposed to start on January 3rd. It was $110 billion. It was half from defense and half from non-defense. And so that meant that every program in DoD and every program in non-DoD, outside DoD, would be cut by 9.4 or 8.2%. Some programs, Social Security, food stamps, SNAP, WICs, foster care, things like that, are mandatory programs, and they're exempt. Salaries to the troops, the salaries to the troops fighting overseas are not going to be cut under this law, so they're exempt. So when you start exempting these things, then okay. So sequestration 2.0, that's supposed to say, sorry, I missed this one, is $86 billion, so don't look at the slide. Sorry, I had it right on my first two. So is $86 billion in cuts, and that is again split between defense and non-defense. $43 billion out of defense, 43 non-defense, and that's going to start on March 1st. Whereas the percentage cut goes down because you have reduced the cuts from 110 billion to 86. By delaying it for another 2 months, you're basically cramming 12 months of cuts into 7 months, which means that the overall cut, the resulting cut this year could be 10 to 13% in each individual program. How far that goes down remains to be seen. OMB and the White House haven't really prescribed. Does it go to each individual project? Does it go to the sub-program level? Does it go to the program level? One thing it does not do is it does not say, well, NSF is going to have their funding cut by 7%, or the Department of Justice is going to have their budget cut, and then they can decide where to make those cuts. It's not that. But how far that goes down remains to be seen. So what's the impact? The impact is that the external grant programs will be cut under sequestration. The federal government has a large infrastructure. They have salaries, they have workers, they have salaries, they have buildings, they have rent. Those won't necessarily be cut so much. So where are they going to cut? They're going to cut with external grant programs. The White House last week announced that we'll see hundreds of fewer awards from NIH. Success rates, which are low anyway, would drop again. So 14%, pretty hard. NSF would see 1,000 fewer research awards. That's about 10% of their research awards. That's significant, from 22 to 16%. So, that's the impact of sequestration. Continuing resolution. The FY 2013 budget, which is the year that we're in right now, was supposed to be passed on October 1st. Congress didn't pass any appropriations bills last year to fund the federal government. And instead they passed a 6-month continuing resolution, which pushed off the final decisions until March 27th. On September 27th, March 27th seemed like a long ways away. Now it's here. So that continued the government spending at, well, $8 billion above FY12. But anyway, it's over $1 trillion, but at level funding overall. Under the CR, agencies and program managers are authorized to spend up to 90% of their current funding. But what they're doing is that they're holding the funding, and that's human nature. And they've done this before. We've had CRs virtually every year. We haven't really had one quite this long. And they're holding their money back because they don't know what their future budget's going to be. They're delaying solicitations. They're delaying major decisions. They're not making any new starts. The downside of that is that what it is. The upside of that is that once we do get certainty, they're going to be in a rush to get money. So the CR expires March 27th. We're actually fairly close to a resolution on the FY 2013 budget. On the staff level, the Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, had negotiated a deal where they were pretty much ready to go before the holidays, and had offered it up to pass it before the holidays, along with the Fiscal Cliff bill, but it was sort of too much to bear for Congress to pass the Fiscal Cliff bill with the tax increases, which is what they did, and pass the budget at that same time. Speaker Boehner decided that he would have more leverage to wait for the budget for the next Congress, and that's probably true. That's where we are now. Some members of Congress, many actually, particularly the conservative Republicans, are calling for the March 27th date to have a government shutdown. If they don't agree to a new budget, the government shuts down. I worked at the Commerce Department back in 1995. The government shut down twice. I believe that was the Newt Gingrich, Bill Clinton showdown, and that President Clinton was victorious in that. The problem is that most of the members of Congress and House and Senate now weren't in Congress in 1995, so they might have fuzzy memories, but there are a number of people that are calling for that, to use the government shutdown to leverage that for additional spending cuts. And then you have the debt limit increase, which expires on May 18th. And who knows how that will play out. President Obama has said that he will not negotiate any spending cuts this year. And so you've got March 1st, you've got March 27th, you've got May 18th. If one problem is solved, there's another problem right behind it. I don't know how they're going to solve this. But the takeaways are uncertainty. External grant funding will be a big casualty, and solicitations are being delayed, limited resources, increasing competition. The federal government still spends $1 trillion, so don't be too depressed. I heard that there were a couple people in the morning session that were depressed. So they don't spend $1 trillion on John Jay College of Criminal Justice, or on things that you care about or want, or things that they should. But they do spend $1 trillion, and out of that, there is funding available for us. On the criminal justice side, so I kind of just walked through the Department of Justice a little bit. I mean, these are the 3 grant-making programs and agencies within DOJ. In 2011, after the Republicans took the House, they negotiated a budget deal. And it cut kind of here and there and that sort of thing, but it really cut state and local law enforcement. It really did cut the Department of Justice, who probably took one of the bigger hits of any agency in Washington. Now, the part of this was a lot of these funds that were cut were for earmarks, because Congress was funding a lot of earmarks through DOJ, right or wrong. It was a way for places like John Jay and others, thousands of others, to get funding. So, National Institute of Justice saw its budget go down back in 2011, but now it's pretty much steady. The administration had requested a 20% increase for FY 2013. The FY 2014 budget request is due out in the next couple of weeks or so. But the House and Senate are at $40 million, so it's pretty much guaranteed. If there is a budget, aside from sequestration, you get $40 million. So, you're probably familiar with this. There are, I think it's 16 actually, open solicitations. And NIJ puts out all their solicitations at the beginning of the year, and then they stop, and then they're done. Not like other agencies, which may do it every 6 months. And program managers do talk after the release of the solicitation. So I would encourage you to follow the NIJ website. If there's anything in there that particularly interests you, there's this announcement that just came out the other day. I thought it was kind of interesting. Social science research on forensic science. If you have some questions, contact the program manager, contact Anthony or myself, and we can try to facilitate a call for you and try to put together some good proposals. John Jay's done very well from NIJ over the years, and hopefully we can continue. Look at the forthcoming solicitations. Now, these program managers will not necessarily talk about post-conviction DNA testing. It's like, well, I'm kind of thinking about this, but try to put your project and your proposal together. I get the notices whenever NIJ publishes a new solicitation, and we can send that along, particularly if you let me know that there's one that you may be interested in. We talked a bunch about the research on domestic radicalization. That is a program that is funded in the House Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Bill at $4 million. It was not in the President's budget. And the Senate has 0. So they truly could be $4 million or 0 or 2, because it's unclear how that would come out in a conference. And the domestic radicalization program is actually not funded out of NIJ, even though NIJ operates it. It's funded out of the state and local law enforcement program. It's just a way to fit more money into the program, into NIJ. So the House report language, on domestic radicalization talks about the homegrown terrorist plots and attacks. And it really, again, seems like a program that would fit right into the type of work that John Jay does. This is domestic. This isn't international. That's other programs, because this is the Department of Justice. But if you've got some idea or program that's international, if you can sort of make it a domestic component, all the better. Last year, there were 15 proposals submitted and 6 were funded. That's a pretty good hit rate. Doesn't mean that everybody who submitted something got funding, but it's better than 14%. So again, if there's and they didn't fund these over multiple years. They added up to about $3 million. So you look at, what types of projects were funded in domestic radicalization, community policing, Somali refugees, etc. Office of Violence Against Women. So, it's not just NIJ. NIJ is the main, obviously, program for universities in the Department of Justice, but Violence Against Women has several programs for campus security and also other things. Transitional housing. Interestingly, the Violence Against Women Act, which would have, broad bipartisan support, has been operating without an authorization for several years now. The Senate actually just passed a Violence Against Women authorization, but the House has not. So that doesn't necessarily mean the program can still survive, and it really doesn't mean anything specifically, but it does mean that the program officers are going to be a little reticent to go too far forward with their funding, because Congress hasn't passed an authorization, hasn't said, I support this program and I want it to continue. State and local law enforcement assistance, we saw big cuts back in 2011. Now it's pretty much stayed level, but here and there, changes here and there. But this is kind of the new normal, because this is, it's a pretty hefty cut, $400 million below what it was just a couple years ago. COPS programs, very, very controversial in the House. This was started under President Clinton, and a lot of people see it as like a Clinton program. A lot of people in Congress see police as a local issue, and it shouldn't be funded by the federal government. But so the House has cut this program way back in FY 2013, but they do fund community projects. I know that John Jay's received funding through the COPS program in community development. And I would encourage you to keep an eye on this, see where it goes. They do have open solicitations too. OJJDP, a lot of the OJJDP funding, and a lot of the Burn Grant program, the Burn JAG program, which some of you are probably familiar with, that money goes to the states. So and then the state through block grants. Same with OJJDP. most of their funding goes to the states. And then the state would make contracts, hold competitions, different states do different things with this funding. But I would encourage you to look at Albany as a source for federal funding. When they've cut back on funding that would go directly from DOJ to universities, which is why a lot of the why Congress was earmarking a lot of funds within DOJ, because it was a way to direct funding from Washington, D.C. to their university or their police department. Now that earmarks have gone away for the time being, most of it goes through the state. So we'll make these slides available, but I encourage you to talk to Schomburg, talk to the commissioner, and look at that program and see if there are opportunities for John Jay. So Department of Homeland Security, again, they took a big hit, and we talked about this over lunch, so I don't have to, but again, there was a lot of concern, particularly in the House, over the research, and it wasn't well organized, and it wasn't really going anywhere, and so they cut the funding by about 50%, which is fairly significant. You see that the president's budget request included about a 10% increase, so it went down and then it's gone back up, but it's kind of sort of that new normal. Again, where the funds just aren't available through DHS, through the R&D program like they were. But there are opportunities there, and I would encourage you to look at these. Now, the priority is to fund the corporate research with the short turnaround. That's true, and we're not really going to change that. But there's this hostile behavior predict and protect program where we might be able disaster resilience, where we might be able to be successful. And when I was talking to a friend of mine over at DHS, he gave me these names of some people to talk to. So again, DHS, they're going to be interested in talking to you. It is difficult to get funding here. I won't minimize it, but there are opportunities. The SARPA, the counterterrorists. I'd encourage you to call these people, talk to them, see if you can put together a proposal. You're familiar, I'm sure, with the University Centers of Excellence through DHS. This is where they put the bulk of their university research funding, about $40 million a year, and there are 12 of them. And I know that several people here are associated with the START Center of Excellence at the University of Maryland, particularly. But I would encourage you to, if there's a way that you can collaborate with any of these, they do get a set amount of funding, and that they compete for other funding too. That's just where they've gone with, for better or worse, in DHS. They've concentrated their university research through these 12 centers of excellence. They do the small education program. It's not a lot, but it is. John Jay's received funding for this, and so there's career development, summer internships, minority serving institutions, and I would encourage you to apply on the education side, criminal justice side, to DHS. Each of these solicitations is being held up due to the budget, what we talked about earlier, due to the uncertainty of the budget. Department of Defense. DOD does have funding available for criminal justice activities, sort of more on the international side, and it is going to be different. But I would take a look at they fund these relatively generic BAAs, which are these are the types of programs and projects that we're interested in. They don't do a lot of the specific request for proposal, start date, end date. It's like, this is kind of what we're interested in, and please let us know. They fund things, DOD funds things through merit review. It's not peer review. Rarely peer review. I wouldn't say never say never. But most of them are merit review. It's like, this is a good project. The program manager decides that he or she thinks we should fund that. The DOD should fund that, which means that you have to have a relationship with that program manager. Some of the people will be more open to talk well, that's human nature. But if you can identify some of these program managers, maybe in DARPA or elsewhere, particularly if they're new. They usually rotate in and out, and when they're new is the best time to reach them. Yes?
I just wanted to add to that, with DARPA at least, when you go online and you look at the program manager information, it'll tell you what they're interested in. It'll give the descriptions of what they like to, their interests, their background.
And you want to just call them and like try to start a relationship. Say, I'm thinking about this, and they would generally ask for like a white paper. I mean, they don't ask you to put together a full-blown proposal unless they're sort of interested. So, and their timing is that they'll make decisions in spring and summer with implementation in the fall or winter based on their budget, which they never really know from year to year. But I think that that's a great opportunity, sort of untapped opportunity for John Jay, where we just really haven't done a lot. So, Minerva is a program we talked about at lunch. This was started by Secretary Gates. It's social science research. Again, most of DoD is funded, on making a better bomb, better gun, better protection, medical research. That's probably how it should be. There's a small amount of funding. Some people still think it's too much, but there is a small amount of funding that's available for social research. There's the Minerva program. There's also a social, cultural, behavioral program within the Office of Naval Research. There's a program within the Air Force Office of Scientific Research in social science. There's funding that's put out by the commands that's not through an RFP, but like a guy that I know just got some money through the Africa Command for looking at a survey and things that the Africa Command was interested in. Most of the funding in the Navy, well, and elsewhere, is that they're holding the funding back with the uncertainty. But they want to know you. They want to. And Minerva is a competition. It's like it's published. It's got an end date. It's like this is what we're particularly interested in. We talked about this at lunch last year. They generated 330 white papers. So first they ask for a white paper, and then they invite you back for a full-blown proposal. And they did 55 full proposals, and then they made 10 awards. And this was kind of cobbled, the money was cobbled together, because they had had their budget cut significantly by Congress in FY 2012. They didn't think that the Minerva program should exist, but it's not a high hit rate, 330 down to 10. These are the types of projects that were funded in FY 2012. So you look at that's just I don't know UC San Diego, but anyway, that's what I was saying before. It's like they got 2 awards. So we actually had a team that came down and we met with the Minerva program manager. They have conferences. They talked about the different things that they're working on. Another guy that I know applied for this year, not at John Jay, but in FY 2012, he thought he was going to get one, and then he didn't at the end. And he had been invited back, and then he reapplied this year, and he didn't even get past the first round, so whatever that means. But if you have any questions about Minerva, they're going to publish another solicitation this summer, and it's a program I think that is just right for John Jay. Between Minerva, the domestic radicalization, some of these other programs, there's some great opportunities. Broadly speaking, the federal government strategy, we talked about this over lunch, talked about it this morning, but directly interact with the program managers, write proposals. If you get rejected, resubmit. Find something maybe the next year, or maybe the next year, or another avenue. Be aggressive. Write with your funding. Serve on panels. Review proposals. Attend workshops. Attend agency days. Sign up for the newsletters. You know, it's very important to, you know, these grants.gov publishes hundreds and thousands of solicitations, and it's overwhelming if you look at them. We try to, in my office, we try to narrow them down, make them more focused, more readily available. We look at grants.gov, we look at FedBizOps, we look at other agency websites in terms of what's coming out, when it's coming out, what's coming down the pike. But also, I'd encourage you to, you know, look at the solicitations. If it doesn't match what you're doing today, it may tomorrow. So call the program manager and try to position yourself for funding maybe for the next year. Read the solicitations, read the criteria, focus on intellectual merit, broader societal impact, and you know, we can be successful. Where I'm available, you know, anytime if you ever have any questions, to try to set up a call with a program manager. You can work through Anthony. I've got my cards up here, you know, and to help you succeed. So I look forward to it. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Questions, anyone?
Specifically, you mentioned funding through the specific command. How would you go about finding? You just look into the various programs that are going on, and you know, contact somebody in the phone book. How would you find out if they do have money?
You know the way I guess the best answer to that is funding that they just sort of like dole out, so they don't really publicize. And the other person that I know that got the funding, it was through an FFRDC that knew him, that works with him, that the Africa Command had approached the FFRDC. That's how we got it.
Oh, okay.
So it's part of, it's really, I mean, I know it's tough, but it's part of just sort of getting out there and getting that.
Yeah.
And it does turn into it, you know, particularly through DOD, it really does turn into an old boy network. That's what you have to do. So it's why back in the earmark days, why Congress would earmark projects, because it was really hard for universities or companies or whatever, institutions that didn't have a track record within DOD to get funding. You could get a little funding, you could start a relationship with the program manager who would maybe like your work, or maybe they didn't, you know, it's like, but that's what it was, backed up with a little funding. It's kind of like a forced, you know, relationship. But now they don't do that, so it's just a matter of trying to get out there, trying to get known. And it's tough through the commands, because then they do just fund the people that they know.
Right.
But I would think in terms of, particularly about these BAAs, that so many of them, yeah, okay, maybe you know, they're focused on better engineering, building a better bomb, building a better this, building a better that. But there's also people who are interested in what John Jay is working on. There are programs that are interested in what John Jay is working on. So it's just a matter of finding those people and talking to them, making yourself known.
Well, great.
Any
We'll
other
be
questions?
around for a few more minutes.
Yeah. So if many of you were here at lunch, so we had a lot of questions. Anyway, thanks for coming.
Thank you.